walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path,
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artesana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Seed, I'm your host, and today is another solo episode going along this theme that I've been working with over the past couple weeks, both here on the podcast and in my writing over on Substack and in my newsletter, dealing with the theme of uninitiated womanhood and the reality of modern womanhood, and essentially what I feel like as the grand homework assignment of what it means to be a woman in the world right now. And for those of you who have been following along, you know that I taught a really, really exciting class last week called Motherline Medicine, and it was all about the 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood, which are birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth. And let me tell you, I was so unbelievably humbled and honored and excited and, shocked by the response that this class received. Over 60 women signed up for the class during the 48-hour replay window. Over 100 women watched that in that time. And the women who were in class live were just incredible and asked some amazing, amazing questions. And so this episode is going to be kind of diving into what came up in that class and deepening into the questions that were asked, because the beautiful thing about this class was that the women who signed up, the women who watched the replay, the women who came live were all absolute badasses, right? Women in their maiden years, women in their mothering years, women in their grandmothering matriarch years. And it was such a powerful experience to be in a space with such a expansive age range of women's experiences. And what I was feeling into was a lot of women who have been doing some really deep and really powerful and potent lineage work on their own, right? These are women who are deep in their healing work, women who have likely been doing it for years at this point, maybe decades at this point, women who have so much medicine and so much magic and so much wisdom from their own lived embodied experience of essentially having to figure this out on their own. And so the questions that arose in this class were incredible because they were not coming from a place of, being like helpless and, a victim place of like, oh God, what do I do? Which is also a valid place to be in. We've all been there, of course. But it was really from women who were coming from a place of deep, deep responsibility and maturity and a desire to step into the fullest expression of initiated womanhood possible. And so, with this episode, I want to share a little bit about the questions that came up and the answers that I gave and extend upon them because a lot of them are pointing to these very common women's wounds that we all experience and also flavors of wounding within women's spaces, whether that's women's spaces in your own family system or women's spaces if you've ever put yourself in a position that's very vulnerable of like going to a women's circle or going to a women's ceremony or joining an all women's class and the very tender dynamics of that. I've been in spaces where there's been unbelievable healing with other women, and then I've been in spaces where there's like even deeper wounding that comes up in women's spaces. And so this episode is really going to be addressing all of that, the women's wounds within women's spaces and how we heal that. So I want to really respect the intimacy and the privacy of that class and that container. I only had the free replay available for 48 hours after the class. And that was mostly just to hold a really tight container around the women who came live and who were vulnerable to ask questions. So I'm going to paraphrase the questions that they asked to respect their anonymity. But I am going to include my live answers that I offered in class. And also, I've had a couple of days to sit on it and think about it, and I have some even deeper transmissions that came through, so I'm going to extend on some of them. But I want to share these questions and answers with you guys because they are really deeply felt. I think they're cross-cultural experiences of fractured feminine lineages and not having access to our women's wisdom-keeping ways and feeling lost, feeling abandoned, feeling confused, but also feeling like ferociously devoted and dedicated and committed to bringing all of this medicine forth and to revitalizing it and to reweaving it within our own bloodlines, our own families, our own communities, and echoing out in that way. So I would love to get into some of these questions now. The first one that came up, which is, such a tender one, that a beautiful sister in class asked about. And essentially what she was saying was, how do you sit with the grief of essentially being like the first woman in your family at this point in time who is doing really deep lineage work? And who has the time and the energy and the space and the tools and the capacity to deepen into the pain and the suffering and the loss of all of that, and to move through the grief in order to show up as essentially a future matriarch for your family, for the descendants to come. So this was my response to that beautiful question. For myself, nothing actually shifted for me until I started getting into rooms with women who were moving through the same thing as me. And that happened both virtually in a lot of different classes and trainings that I've done, and it happened in the in-person work that I did. And I really think that, especially when you are a woman who has gone through what we're going through and you just feel so alone in your family system, it's this understanding that like we can't do this work alone, and we actually really, really, really desperately need other women around us to be those mirrors for us and to hold that for us. Because a lot of the time when we go to our moms about this and like grieve and cry, they take it as a critique or an assault or an attack on their mothering, right? And I myself wasn't able to really heal my motherline split until I realized that I couldn't keep running from sisterhood. And I had to get in the room with women who were down to do this work with me in a way that none of the female elders in my life can. And so I think that that's really what it is, of sitting across the fire from women and being in this work with women who are in it as well, and being able not only just to be able to grieve alongside one another, but to resource one another as well, and to pass the tools that we have, because we all have incredible gifts that we bring to the table that can be cultivated and deepened and sharpened and honed when we're in relationship with other women who are able to really celebrate us and witness us in that. Now, to extend a bit more upon this question and this answer that I gave over the past couple of days when I've been sitting and feeling into it, was really a big phase that I went through actually, for like the past year, being back at home living with my parents and reorienting my relationship to my mother. I had a very fractured relationship with my family for probably like a decade. I went through many periods of being essentially no contact with them, a lot of pain. And what came through when I was back living with my parents was so much unbelievable rage towards my mom. What I thought was towards my mom. And what was really coming up for me was being like, you were the one who was supposed to teach me all of the things about womanhood that would allow me to arrive into mature adulthood, like intact and fully in my power and fully in my body and fully aligned with my feminine medicine. And you didn't teach me, and you failed. Like, I had so much rage towards my mom that took many months to move through, many, many months to move through, and many inappropriate fights that I picked with her. And it was an important phase to go through. And I'm also like truly sad and embarrassed about how I handled things. And I'm also really empathetic to the point that I was at in that moment, because that was kind of like my inner teenager, just like being angry in a way that she didn't get to be angry when she was younger. However, there came a point when I had to recognize that my mother would have taught me all of this if she had been taught all of this herself. And my grandmother would have taught her all of this if my grandmother had had access to it herself. And my great-grandmother would have taught my grandmother this. And so it became this thing of recognizing that actually my anger was not anger. Below it was deep grief and sadness and separation and loss. And it was understanding that I was actually holding like multiple generations, so many generations on my motherline of just grief, 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 grief. And so the anger was the easiest thing to tap into, and it was an important phase to go through to get to the grief. But then I realized that I was getting stuck in the grief, and I wasn't actually activating and mobilizing and recognizing, okay, then what is the work here? If I felt my feelings, if I've understood how absolutely heartbreaking this is, what is the remedy to this? The remedy to this is that I take responsibility for being the woman in my family who does this work, and to not place any of that responsibility onto the women who came before me, because they literally did the best they could with the tools that they had at their disposal. They did all of the work that they were supposed to do within our family system, and they did it and are doing it perfectly. So what is my work? That's the only thing that I am responsible for. That's the only thing that I am capable of doing. And that's the best way that I can serve and really re-belong myself to my family and to my motherline, and to heal my entire lineage, 7 generations forward and back, doing that time travel work for us. That's what this looks like. And so I think that grief medicine is not only something that when we allow ourselves to feel it, it heals us, but it heals our whole mother line. It heals all of those fractures because we're showing the women who came before us who didn't have access to this that it wasn't lost. It went underground for a while because that was the safest thing to do, but that it's still alive and well in the women of my bloodline. So that's a little bit of what's been coming through around grief. Now, the next question that came up that was really beautiful was essentially a woman who is asking, are there books and resources and things that you can recommend to essentially learn about Motherline Medicine? And there have been a couple that I mentioned in class. The book that really changed my entire life, the first time I read it, is called The Red Tent by Anita Diamond. And I read that book when I was like 15. And I've read it multiple times a year, every single year since then. It's like my Bible. And it's, for those who are not familiar, it's a fictionalized story of the 12 tribes of Israel told from the perspective of the women of the family. And that book is essentially what awoke in me the realization that I was walking the path of a midwife when I was like 15. I had never even heard the term midwife until I read that book, and I was like, oh, that's me. Not even like I want to do that, just like, oh, that's me. And so that was one resource that I offered. But it's not like a how-to guide necessarily. It's like a beautiful fictional story. And there's another really great book by a woman named Maureen Murdoch, all about the heroine's journey. However, in terms of other resources and maybe kind of like academic or online or like, readable resources, this was my response to the question, which I think is one that people might not expect, but it also is just the truth. Honestly, pretty much all of my understanding of Motherline Medicine and the 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood came from all of my own suffering. All of my own suffering. Some of it was self-induced, some of it was not, but it truly has come through my own very intense process, predominantly being in the jungle, of seeing the pain and sadness and deep, deep trauma within my motherline and having to drink hundreds of cups of medicine to purge it and heal it and clear it. And with every single layer that was uncovered, brought me deeper into the understanding of this is how I rebelong myself to my motherline. And so I don't really have any texts that I can speak to so much, because the thing about feminine medicine is that it's not necessarily something that you can read in a book. It's held inside of us. It's
Mm.
it's this. This is your greatest teacher. There's nothing that you need to do to seek outside of yourself to understand what your feminine path looks like. It's your body. It's all of these 5 initiations that we just spoke to. So if you want to learn anything about the feminine path, go right into your body. That's your teacher. That's your greatest teacher above anyone or anything. It's you. Now, I want to be really clear and say that you do not have to go live in the jungle and drink hundreds of cups of ayahuasca to come to the understandings that I came to. That was simply my path. And I've also done a lot of learning outside of the jungle around all of this. But it does really speak to the reality of what the feminine path is and what these 5 cross-cultural physiologic initiations of womanhood are, which is birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth. And essentially what all of Motherline Medicine was about, that class that I taught, is just this understanding that as women, our bodies already initiate us from girlhood into womanhood, into motherhood, into elder grandmotherhood. Naturally, right? We go through these physiologic, biological changes throughout the expanse of our lives. And our bodies are essentially saying to the world, this is what phase of my feminine becoming that I am in right now. And so, as I said in that answer, we are at a kind of weird time right now as women where we've done big pendulum swings, especially I would say with many waves of like first wave, second wave, third wave feminism, where a lot of women had to really put on many masculine traits in order to succeed and thrive and be financially independent in many important and valuable ways. There's also been a very intense disembodiment and detachment from the reality of the female reproductive cycle, the female hormonal matrix. And the truth is that we're kind of in this big phase of like relearning. Like women are actively seeking out many different resources, and there's a lot. There's so many podcasts, there's so many books, there's so many courses that you can take, all of that kind of stuff. But what I have found is realigning with the 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood that my body already initiated me through, and bringing my psyche and my spirit into alignment with what my body has already moved into. And so when I say like your greatest teacher is your body, I really mean that sincerely. It's amazing to look at all of the different tools that are available to us. And also, that's quite a masculine way of processing things, right? Processing it analytically in the mind and just reading about it and consuming a lot of data information versus descending into the body and understanding what is going on here in my feminine form and what medicine does it hold and what does it teach me, and to not be afraid of the dark that comes with those beautiful descents into the physical body. So that was pretty much all of Motherline Medicine. The class that we were moving through was talking about that, going deep into the body, going into those initiations, and bringing forth the medicine that comes through them. So the next beautiful question that came up was from a really incredible woman who joined, who is in her matriarch years, and she was talking about how she has 3 sons. And she herself does a lot of really incredible women's work, and she's mentoring a lot of younger women. And she was talking about the beautiful position that she was in of not being able to pass down her motherline medicine technically within like her bloodline, but what that looks like in terms of mentorship and teaching and instruction. And she was asking me about what my experience was with my elders when I lived in the jungle, and what those transmissions look like when they're not necessarily passed down through blood ancestry, but more through spiritual ancestry. And I think that this was a beautiful question because it comes up for a lot of women, either women who didn't have their own daughters, they had sons, or for women who don't have children, and being able to tap into the truth that we still have so much to pass on, even if it's not through our blood lineage. So this was my response to that question that she asked. I'm a European daughter. I ended up in the jungle being adopted by 2 indigenous people from the Kofan and the Muroi people. And the understanding that within an intact culture, every child is your child, right? Even if they didn't come from your own womb, all adults are responsible for orienting, guiding, educating, protecting, providing, caring for all of the children. And so even if you're not passing down your wisdom, your motherline medicine genetically, the work that you are doing with women through spiritual lineage is what I would refer to it, right? Educational lineage is just as valuable. It's different, of course, but it is just as valuable. And so the women that you are taking on as daughters and as granddaughters, they probably don't have mothers or grandmothers that they can look to like you. And that was the case for me with my elders. I didn't have women to look to in my lineage, or really even men to look to in my lineage for good orientation. And so the work that you are doing as a matriarch in your community it's unbelievable. It's so needed, right? The village medicine woman, the village midwife, the village wise woman is not just the woman that you're related to by blood. It's the one who is orienting you in spirit and with deep love. And that's what you're doing. So, another thing that I want to add with this is that oftentimes our family systems are really complicated and mother-daughter relationships are really complicated. And I know from my experience of learning with my elders, there are things that they were able to teach me that they weren't necessarily able to teach their blood descendants simply because of the closeness of the relationship and the intensity of it with their children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, versus that degree of blood separation that I experienced with my elders. And so there were things that they could pass on to their children that they couldn't pass on to me, and there were things that they could pass on to me that they couldn't pass on to their children. And it's because there's less of an emotional charge in a way. And so in that respect, I was incredibly lucky and grateful to learn under my elders, because honestly, they were teaching me things that my parents have tried to teach me for a long time, for many years, that like I couldn't actually receive from them just because of the history that we had. And everything that I did learn with my elders, I was able to bring back to my family and essentially go through the test of applying it within my family system. And so I think that that's really the work of understanding blood lineage versus spiritual lineage and how they really co-weave together, and why, as women, being able to pass our motherline medicine down in various ways is a big part of our responsibility as well. And it's a big part of our blessing as women to share in that way. Now, the last question that was asked is definitely a common one, and it's pretty much why over 60 women signed up for Motherline Medicine and why so many women watch the replay, which is this question of, if you are a woman who does not have a mother or a grandmother or a lot of in-person female community or elders to look to, and you're just kind of out here on your own trying to figure this out, how do you stay grounded and how do you not lose yourself in the vastness of that search? And my response to that was this. One, recognizing that the land is your mother, that the land holds you more than anyone, right? That's like the biggest nurturing force that we have. And so being able to go out onto the land and be with her. And the other part of it that I would say, which is where I see a lot of women get stuck in many, many different phases of our womanhood becoming, is this inability to accept, I need to take on the initiative to reach out to women who are also doing this work and to be in community with them in whatever way that looks. And a lot of the time these days, it looks like doing that online, which has been my whole experience over this past year. I didn't have any intact community where I was living. I had that in the jungle. I came back to the States and it was totally gone. And I was devastated. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? And I was able to find it online, and it actually started creating many in-person connections over the whole year in many different things that I did. But I think a big part of it is women realizing we're not supposed to do this alone. This is not the design. This is not how our nervous systems work. Yes, we are self-initiating, but we don't do it alone. We do it in community with other women. We do it like how we're doing right now. Like, this is how we do it, right? It would be amazing if we could be sitting in person doing all of this, but that's not the reality for most of us. And it's also a gift and a tool to be able to do it in this way online, to make these connections and to feel these shifts in the sphere when we are brave and when we are responsible for finding the connections that are really going to nourish us, because no one's going to create it for us. We really have to seek out the support. We really have to tend to those relationships, and we really have to commit to showing up vulnerably, right? In the way that we've been doing today with each other. I think this is really the way that women do it, especially when we don't have anyone around in our own lineages and bloodlines or even community to do it with. we get strategic, which is what women are known for, right? We get resourceful and we reach out and we find one another like this. Now, I want to extend on this answer because I think it is like a big amplification of one of the deepest wounds of womanhood, which is essentially when I tap into my own lineage, which is European womanhood. I feel into the lived embodied experience of what happened to the women of my line, specifically during the witch trials. And that was occurring for many, many centuries. But there were many waves of colonization and violence and cultural genocide that occurred in Europe for like 1500 years before it left Europe and spread across the globe. And when I feel into it, I feel into the ways that women's medicine was systematically attacked, and then the ways that women were turned on one another, where they essentially had to separate from each other so that they wouldn't be accused of being a witch, and then eventually like turning on one another out of survival, because if you accused another woman of being a witch, then like you weren't going to be accused. And all of these really intense fractures that came from what women's medicine actually is, which is what our nervous systems are designed for. Our nervous systems as women are designed for connection. They're designed for resource sharing. They're designed for information sharing and education. Women are hyper-verbal in a way that men are not. And so to cut off that women's wisdom-keeping web of resourcing is something that we now as modern women have a really deep responsibility to heal within ourselves and within our families and within our communities. And so when we talk about kind of the feminine path right now and it feeling really isolated in a lot of ways, women trying really hard to self-initiate, women trying really hard to reinitiate, women trying really hard to reclaim and reweave all of these lost wisdom ways into our lived experience, I would say the most important part of it is recognizing I'm not designed to do this alone. I cannot do this alone, and it's part of my work to learn how to come back into relationship with other women in any capacity that looks like, which is not easy. I want to be really clear. It is not easy. I had 2 in-person experiences this past year where I was doing 2 different bodywork trainings. And the first one that I did was with like over 20 women, almost 30 women. And it was easily like the safest, cleanest, most loving, most vibrant, most gentle, most powerful women's space that I had ever been in. It was a women's space that I didn't even know could exist, being around women who were intact, women who were mature, women who had gone through so much of their own reinitiation into womanhood, women who had really strong spines and soft hearts. And that experience was profoundly, profoundly healing for me. I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been missing my whole life. This experience of sisterhood. I didn't even know that this was real. And then a couple months later, I had the exact opposite experience of a bodywork training that I did with a group of women where it brought up every single one of my sister wounds, every single one of my women's wounds, every single part of me that was like, I want nothing to do with women's spaces, women's communities. I was so much better off as like an isolated little hedge witch who just did my own thing. And it was really painful. It really, really messed me up for probably like a whole month. And what came through with that was my own level of self-responsibility to understand, okay, what role was I playing in that situation? What boundaries do I have now around the women's spaces that I'm in? How do I hold myself? How do I express myself? How do I move through conflict differently, right? Which has been a big thing of now me deciding to fully commit to my midwifery path, go to midwifery school, all of that kind of stuff, being in births. Like it was a really important phase to move through with that experience. But all of that is to say, I can't run from that work, and none of us as women, if we want to be adult, mature, initiated women, it's not a homework assignment that we can bypass. I think it's actually kind of the main homework assignment that we have right now is to come back into right relationship with womanhood, with other women. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it is really beautiful work. And it's something that I have seen deeply reflected in the friendships that I've developed with women over the years, but especially this past year of coming into such beautiful sisterhood with a lot of the women actually that I have on this podcast, a lot of the women that I've been doing trainings with, a lot of the women who I've traveled to see and to learn alongside. All of that has been deeply, deeply nourishing. And all of that is what has really brought forth both my confidence and my capacity and my ability now to be able to hold space for women, both in person and online. And it's also what has really inspired this class that I taught, Motherline Medicine. And it's really what inspired the longer class that I'm teaching that is starting on February 17th. And that class is called The Red Tent. It's inspired by that amazing book that I mentioned by Anita Diamond. And it's an extension of these 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood that we went through in the Motherline Medicine class. So The Red Tent is a 7-week online immersion for women who are ready to reinitiate themselves into womanhood. It is a biospiritual reorientation to female reproductive care, which is essentially a structured initiation into womanhood that modern culture really no longer provides at this point. And the 3 pillars of this container is womb-centered education, sacred storytelling, and feminine devotional art practices in order for us to gather in community and reweave that fractured web of women's wisdom keeping that's been lost across our collective female lineages. So the basis of it is this really deep exploration and also reorientation to those 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood, which is birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth, and utilizing those 5 physiologic initiations to realign with our innate capacity for health, vitality, creativity, fulfillment, prosperity, and fertile living. Now, the reason that I wanted to teach this in a group capacity is because for, the past 8 years of my life, I've been doing like hundreds of one-on-one consultations and women's circles and ceremonies where I have seen deeply how much wounding occurs when women are misaligned with these 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood. I feel like that is the wound that I see time and time and time again. It'll be a wound that's related to birth, blood, sex, death, or rebirth. And so I've been doing this in person and one-on-one and online for a long time. And what's really coming forth is this understanding that it needs to be brought into a group context like this. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of work that can be healed when you're working one-on-one with someone. And I've done that with a lot of women at this point. But the beauty of group containers is that the field itself of all of the women who are within the space together is what is informing also the healing within one another. And I think that that's really something that I tapped into more deeply when I was living in the jungle and I was going through so many ceremonies and so many experiences of healing, which was literally never just me and an elder. I think I had one single ceremony where it was just me, my ex-partner, and an elder. But otherwise, it was pretty much always me, many different people who were there as travelers, and my elders' like whole family, right? So it would be my spiritual grandparents along with their children and their grandchildren and other people in the pueblo, all coming together to sit in ceremony and to heal together. And you feel very deeply what other people are healing and moving through and how that is healing and moving through you as well. And so it's also this understanding that we've moved into quite hyper-individualized healing at this point in time, and there's always a time and place for one-on-one work, but that group work is really what has deepened my own healing capacity And also what I see women calling for even more and more, to be in spaces with other women. And it's amazing to be able to do it in person, but right now what is feeling the most accessible for a lot of women is to be able to do it online. So this is the first time that I'm teaching about these 5 physiologic initiations within a group setting online. Therefore, it is being offered at beta pricing. Now, early enrollment has already closed. There was an amazing group of women that stepped forward right after the Motherline Medicine class who were ready to do this work. And so right now we have a group of 13 incredible women. It is going to be maidens and mothers and matriarchs from all ages. I'm feeling really honored and excited for the group that's already forming. But open enrollment is still going until February 17th. And as I said, it's beta pricing. This is the first time I'm teaching this class in this setting, and I really do want to honor the role that the women are going to be playing in this first cohort. So it's being offered for $347, which includes those 7 weeks of live classes. It also includes a lot of other educational resources that women can tap into on their own time, past classes that I've taught, womb meditations, body work demonstrations that women can do for a lot of self-care practices. And then a big aspect of this whole container as well is really deepening into our creative capacity as women. I myself am a multidisciplinary artist, and so that's something that I'm really calling forth from women as well, to tap back into their creative juices and to be able to integrate this information essentially in the way that I did in the jungle, which was all of these intense downloads that I was getting from the instruction from my teachers. The way that I was really able to translate it was through my art. And that's actually the gift of the feminine, is creation, is beauty. It's something that my elder Abuela Maria told me that I will literally never forget, which was that she said, when women are not creating and birthing beautiful things into the world, we are literally wasting the gifts that God gave us. And so that's going to be also a really beautiful aspect of this container, is inviting women to deepen into their artistic gifts, whatever that looks like for them, and to share it with one another. So that's a big part of this container as well. It's going to be starting on February 17th. As I mentioned with Motherline Medicine, the free replay has been closed. If women do still want to watch it, it's available on my website in the classroom library for $33. If you want to learn more about these 5 physiologic initiations of womanhood, you're welcome to. And for the women who already feel really ready to take on this path of reinitiation, the red tent is open for you. So I'll include all that information in the show notes, and I would love, love, love to see you in that portal. I'm really, really, really excited. I specifically chose to start on the 17th because it is the first new moon of the year of the fire horse, the Lunar New Year. And I know that this past year has been absolutely insane for me. I know that it's been absolutely insane for many other women in terms of all of the wood snake shedding. And so I just feel ready to really, 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 really go for it with the fire horse year. And so this class is starting on that day, which is Tuesday, February 17th. So for all of the women who feel ready and called and like it's their time to really step into the future matriarch and the future wise woman that they themselves needed in their initiation into womanhood, this class is available for you, this space, this container, this reinitiation. This was created for you, and I would love to see you there. Thank you guys so much.